Welcome to Story Chat Radio. We are book editors Carly Hayward and Jenny Chappell. Every month we watch a different movie with an eye for storytelling and novel writing.
We use our years of training and experience editing novels to break down each movie's storytelling elements to help you improve your novel in progress.
Warning, Jenny ruins everything.
Hey, you ruin things too.
So don't be surprised if there are spoilers. On this episode of the podcast, we are discussing the fantasy adventure Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves.
Here come the spoilers. Our story begins with Bard Edgin and Barbarian Holga in an Arctic prison. Standing before a parole council, Edgin recalls the events that led to their imprisonment, aka the backstory. He and Holga, along with 3 others, attempted to steal an artifact that would resurrect Edgin's wife, who had been killed by disciples of a red wizard years before. He and Holga were captured, but the others got away. So after the backstory sequence, the pair make a daring escape from the prison and learn that one of their old comrades, Forge, who has been taking care of Edgin's daughter, Kira, is now a lord. But Forge has convinced Kira that Edgin's greed led to his arrest. Another of their comrades, Sophina, is a red wizard. And together, she and Forge were the ones who orchestrated Edgin and Holga's imprisonment. Betrayal! Sophina attempts to kill Edgin and Holga, but they escape and decide to rob Forge's vault and bring Kira home during the upcoming High Sun Games. But they still need the artifact to prove their innocence to Kira and also to resurrect Edgin's wife still. Edgin and Holga track down their 3rd comrade, Simon, who is a terrible sorcerer, and he suggests also recruiting Doric, who's a druid. Doric infiltrates the castle as a fly and finds that the vault has magical defenses that Simon can't disable, but Simon believes this particular magical helm can. So they learn that the helm is with a paladin named Zenk. With the help of a teleportation staff obtained from Holga's halfling ex-husband, they find the relic, but are attacked by Sophina's assassins.
Oh boy.
Assistants. I'm just trying to make this really mundane. I'm like, they're transporting and they have assistants.
It's real life.
Zenk helps the group escape from the assassins, not assistants, and an obese red dragon, and then he departs. Simon has trouble mastering the helm's power, so they use the teleportation staff to enter the vault during the games. However, the group is captured and forced to participate in the games. Luckily, they escape and find a boat that Forge has loaded with treasure and rescue Kira from Forge. But they realize, as they're escaping, that Sophina plans to turn the crowd at the games into an undead army the red wizards can control. So they return and transport all of Forge's stolen riches out of the boat with the teleportation staff and spread all the riches across the city by hot air balloon, which draws the people out of the stadium before Sophina's spell can take effect. They defeat Sophina, but Holga is fatally injured. Edgin uses the artifact to bring Holga back to life, accepting that he wanted to bring his wife back only for his own sake, while Holga had become a true part of their family. In a final scene, Forge stands before the same parole council, where he fails spectacularly to escape in the same way that Edgin and Holga did at the beginning. So, Carly, what did you think of this movie?
So we were kind of talking about this off recording because obviously, I really liked this movie. I thought it was fun. I would watch it again. I don't have too many thoughts beyond that.
Yeah.
Like, it's a great adventure comedy. I loved it. It's not breaking any crazy ground or anything, and nor should it.
Right.
I think I do play tabletop RPGs, role-playing games, including D&D, and there were tons of fun Easter eggs and like moments throughout that I could nerd about for a while if you really want me to get into specific spell casting and how come Doric's druid can wild shape so much when mine can't. But that's not interesting for this. I did love what they did with Zank a lot.
Yes,
and
he
how
was
they
amazing.
He was so good. They really made fun of like that noble knight trope, because like paladins in general as a class in D&D are kind of just like honorable dorks.
Right.
And they really dug into like the hilarity of that and playing with that trope. It was very cool. And I mean, I do think this really scratched an itch. I feel like fun movies like this that are actually really well done are becoming kind of few and far between. It's either like intense, amazing dramas or boring comedies or whatever. But this felt modern and good and fun, and I mean, I really liked it, but that's kind of all I got on this one.
Yeah. So I noticed a lot of the little nods to the D&D game too, and I don't play like you do.
Yeah.
And yeah, as they introduced the characters, I kept thinking about like the character sheet you use to create new characters, especially because I know a lot of authors who use something similar as they're creating the characters for their stories. So like that's just how my brain works now.
Yep.
But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I agree. It's a good fantasy adventure, which we don't get much of anymore. And they did a really great job of making the cast more diverse than what we would have seen in similar movies in, say, like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Looking at you, Willow. So, yeah, I also really like that the story plays with a lot of those standard high fantasy tropes in a way that makes the story feel fresher and more modern as well. So, like, I wasn't super surprised that Forge was a villain.
No.
But I thought it was really nicely done that we learned that so early in the story. Like, it's not this big reveal that comes in the second half of the movie and we're like, gasp, oh my goodness, he's evil. And so instead they're able to do some different things with it than you would normally see. So, like, the cast was great. The story was fun. The special effects were amazing. I loved the obese dragon.
Oh, he was great.
All of the magic stuff was beautiful visually. And, yeah, I just really enjoyed it.
I want it to be known that the one time Jenny and I played D&D together, I made her character, and it was really fun and adorable.
And there were owl bears, and there was an owl bear in this movie. So I was like, aw.
Yeah.
It was like a nice little nod just to us.
It was.
So yeah, I think any fantasy fan would like this movie, whether they've played D&D or other like RPGs or not. Just a good movie.
Yeah.
So what's something that this movie does well the authors can use in their writing?
Characterization.
Hey.
Basically what Jenny said. So with such a big cast, it can be really difficult to make sure everyone is equally engaging and is also distinct enough.
Yeah.
So like Jenny said, D&D has a very distinctive character sheet and process for creating characters. And it's honestly very similar to how authors can create characters. I've often given authors the advice of using like this character creation system as a way to help them create their characters for their book. Anyway, when you have a lot of characters, especially in a multi-POV story, it can be difficult to make them distinct and unique people that your readers are going to care about. But I was engaged with all of these characters.
Me too, yeah.
Even if they can be tropey, you still connect with them. Like Jenny said, we know that Forge is going to be a villain, yet he's still engaging and fun.
Right.
Each of the characters has their own backstory, their own journey, their own growth. Edgin is our lead, and his story is kind of the main thrust of the plot. But each character has their own story arc that kind of helps push the narrative, even if in smaller ways. A classic D&D party is made up of very different characters that each bring something different to the table, and a cast of characters in your book is no different. So this shows us how different people add different things to a narrative, and that they should all be imperative to your story.
Yeah, so I mentioned the tropes, you mentioned the tropes. I'd like to start there. Yeah. Like there was one of the things I really noticed in this movie is like I just really want to talk about like tropes and characterization, because we've kind of talked about that before, but not really gone in depth with it.
This would have been a good one for tropes as well.
It would have, right?
Oh, well.
So yeah, D&D characters in general really pull from high fantasy tropes that had already been established, like way before D&D was ever even thought of. But then it
Yes.
takes it and expands on that. So they outline classes, which Carly mentioned. So like in this movie, we have a bard, a barbarian, a rogue, a sorcerer, a druid, paladin, wizard, that are kind of our main cast. And then there are others that we even kind of see in the periphery.
Yeah.
So the other thing that they totally just blank for a second. The other thing, in addition to class, is race.
Yes.
So that's not about skin color for
Nope.
D&D. It's about fantasy ancestry of the character. So obviously you have like humans. There are a couple of humans in this. But then we also have, for example, like Doric is a tiefling, which is a bit of an unusual fantasy race for a druid.
It is.
So like tieflings are half human and half devil. And so not normally associated with druids who are stereotypically like tree hugging peace lovers because they have that affinity with nature. So making Doric a druid adds this softness to a character that would typically be frightening to other races in their world. Other characters break their mold in similar ways. So like Holga is a barbarian. And what I really loved about her is that she has this amazing relationship with Edgin's daughter, Kira. But they never really like soften her, you know? So like normally for a character to be maternal, she needs to be soft. But they never really soften her up. She has this really severe personality, even with her friends. And she's still a really great mother figure.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and then like Edgin, who is arguably the tropiest of the protagonists, even he kind of plays with those tropes. So on the surface, he's this like cocky, happy-go-lucky bard, which is very stereotypical. You know, this charming man who's used to things going his way. But we find that he's really like fully embraced his mediocre white man status, quote unquote, and uses his failures as his motivation. Like he even calls himself the champion of failures in this like rousing speech at the dark moment. I wrote down a quote from that speech.
Wow.
Yeah, we must never stop failing because the minute we do, we failed. Because it's true and also because it makes me giggle.
It's a good one, honestly. And I do like that, like, his role as the mediocre lead white man is honestly just lifting up those around him and, like, helping them utilize their talents, which I like that.
Right.
Anyway.
So anyway, the best way to use tropes when it comes to characters is to decide which ways the characters will meet readers' expectations based on the tropes you use, and then how to subvert other tropes to surprise the reader. So you always want that combination of, you know, some intentional ways that you're making those decisions. So we did do a whole episode on tropes where we touch on tropes, how they impact characters, but didn't go super deep. So I do recommend going back and listening to episode 9 about Parasite to learn more about tropes overall.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Okay, so let's get into how you make a character in D&D.
Yay!
Because I know you all want to play a game with me, so I'm going to walk you through it. So the basis of character creation is picking a race and a class. Don't get me started on how old-fashioned and out of touch some of these terms are. It shouldn't be race. It's not a good choice, but whatever. I'm going to move on for now. That's a whole other spiel. So anyway, this feeds into the type of person your character is going to be, the powers/abilities they have, etc. But the next step is honestly even more important, and that is picking their background. In D&D, you have like a handful of backgrounds to choose from. But basically, this is another way to give them abilities, but it's more about where your character came from and how that influences who they are. So this is where it gets interesting and I think very useful for authors. This choice of background is then leads into all the choices your character oh my god, I just lost my whole sentence. All right. It leads into all the other choices you make because your character's background is going to dictate who they have become, just like in life and in writing. Crazy. So in D&D, choosing your background then lets you choose your character's personality, ideals, flaws, and bonds. These are basically the big 4 categories that you choose that are going to help you know how to play that character. And it tells you kind of how they're going to react in any sort of given confrontation. And it is a great way to think about how to create characters in your book. So we discuss this a lot in our goal, motivation, conflict episode. But once you know what your character wants and why they want it, you know how they're going to react to certain stimuli. So, personality, ideals, flaws, and bonds. These are the most important part of character creation when it comes to who your character is. It's about figuring out what your character believes in, even if that belief is wrong, what flaws hold them back and also make them relatable, who they are / who they care about / what their relationships are like, and then how that all kind of comes together to show their personality. A tip I often give is that characters' relationships show who they are. So like who we like, why we like them, who we hate, why we hate them, and what we will do for and within our relationship shows who a person is better than anything else.
That's a really good tip. I think that's a really important way to look at that.
Oh, thanks. I love it when Jenny compliments me. So we see this in the movie a lot. So let's go with Edgin on this one. He's a funny and charismatic personality. Boom, personality. But his ideals are pretty complex. He was originally typically like a noble person, but then slowly his ideals shifted to taking care of his family and the people around him. I'm not getting into the whole like neutral, lawful, good, evil stuff here, but that kind of plays into a lot of these ideals. It's usually where that comes into play. He's focused on supporting the people he loves, including this adventuring party. His flaws are that he's cocky and honestly afraid of other people being honorable. He is very afraid of Zinc.
So you're saying just because he makes fun of him constantly and picks on everything he does that's honorable, that means he's afraid of him?
I know, weird, right? And then his bonds really run very, very deep. So his love for his daughter, his love for his dead wife, his love for Holga, and even his belief in Simon.
Yeah.
These bonds really dictate who he is and the choices he makes. Like bringing Holga back to life at the end, which is, honestly, I love that.
Yeah.
These characterizations form who he is and how he acts throughout the movie. So basically, when creating your character, ask yourself, what are your character's personality, ideals, flaws, and bonds? And feel free to use a D&D sheet to help you figure it out.
Yeah. And those are available online, like for free too, at lots of different places. So
just RPG character creators in general.
Yeah.
Great place.
Okay, so that was all really good stuff. I was thinking about what you said about him being like he originates as being like a noble character, but I think that still, even though that shifts through his character, like through his backstory that has shifted, we still see that in those deep bonds. Like
for sure,
there's still part of him that holds to some of those same ideals.
Yep.
So I think that's really interesting. Let's keep dissecting his character. No, let's not. So when you're writing and creating a character, you have so many different tools at your disposal as to how you show that characterization on the page. So the biggest ones are physical description, mannerisms, and reactions. You also have interiority if you're using that character as a narrator. Mm-hmm. So in terms of physical description, really think about what you're showing the reader about this character through their physical appearance. So, for example, Holga is very muscly, and like her hair is always up and back in a way that suggests like a clan or Viking-esque kind of ancestry. She doesn't worry about being like quote unquote pretty. In some
Although
ways,
she's very pretty.
she is, but she's not like worried about it. She's not like fussy about her looks. And so Simon is kind of similar. Like, you tend to think of a sorcerer as looking like Gandalf, like this old man with a long beard, but instead Simon is young. Like, he's this skinny kid, and it really goes along with this idea of him being inexperienced and not really knowing how to access his magic. So just really think about what you can show about a character's personality through what they look like. So that's, just kind of in their physical description. So from that point, you want to think about their mannerisms. So mannerisms are like the way that characters speak, how they move their body, how they hold themselves, all of those things that kind of make up how they express themselves externally. It sort of simulates nonverbal communication, since that's not inherent on the page. So how do you use these to show a reader who a character is, what's important to them, how they perceive themselves and their place in the world, kind of all of those things. So Doric is my person I'm going to use for an example here. Mm-hmm. She has this tendency to withdraw, almost like she's skittish. And this really goes back to that she has this very deep distrust of humans. And you can almost see her physically withdrawing. Again, going back to that dark moment I mentioned before, she's like, I can't believe that I trusted you guys. Like, she still has, even though she's been bonding with these people, she has this like very deep inherent mistrust that's really difficult for her to get past. And we see that in those mannerisms. So yeah, in this character, we don't have, or in this story, we don't really have like one particular POV character, which is common in high fantasy. But in a written story, when you have a POV character, then you're going to get to see their interiority. So I do want to touch on that. Interiority is a character's thoughts, their emotions, their internal visceral responses, and then body language responses that like only they would know about. It's like sweating or hot and cold parts of their bodies or something along those lines. So those are all things that count as interiority, because it's something that you only know if you get the character's perspective on what's happening. So these are all tools to put the information on the page and really build up what your character is like, because the alternative is just having like long paragraphs of exposition that tell us what the character is like, instead of showing it through their actions and reactions and all of that stuff.
There is this moment I remember, I don't remember when you told me this, Jenny, but you had a really good example of the difference between like the interiority physical reactions versus the exterior reactions, which was for interiority, the character is going to feel their cheeks warm. For exteriority, you're going to see somebody blush. Right. And like that, there's like that subtle difference of how it feels versus what you see. And I always think about that. It was very smart of you. I really liked it. So it's always kind of stuck in my head. Okay, so the next thing in how we interact with other characters and the world around them, there is that thing. Oh my God, Jenny, we are struggling today to speak. Boy. So, as I mentioned earlier, our relationships show who we are and what we care about. How your character interacts with other characters defines them. A story is all about the interactions between your characters and the world. It's kind of a push and pull of actions and responses. So on a basic level, you want to show who your character is by how they interact with the world, the space, and the people that fill your pages. So ask yourself, how would my character respond to another character that represents their emotional wound? Like giving them that person to come up against is going to show us their wound more accurately than telling us ever could. So let's take Holga as an example, because she's clearly our favorite.
She's the best.
She's the best.
We just need a spin-off just about her.
Yes, I'd watch that. Okay, so
her and Zank. Let's have her and Zank, because they were the best characters.
Oh my God, I would so watch that. Sequel. All right, so she cares for Kira deeply and is constantly trying to keep everyone safe. But she cares about Kira more than she cares about anybody else in the story. She even goes to see her ex-husband in order to make progress on saving her. Her interactions with her ex kind of show how much she cares for Kira and still cares for her ex. She hates seeing him happy, but she's kind of happy for him too, begrudgingly so. And the fact that he found someone else shows her that her inability to move on is what is keeping her from having her own family.
Right.
And then we see how she interacts with Edgin. She tolerates his charisma, rolls her eyes at it, but she also implicitly trusts him to pull it off. It shows the depth of their relationship and how much they've been through together. So all of this is really just like all these interactions show us who Holga is.
I really liked in that dark moment when like everybody else is like, I'm out of here. And she just like turns to him and gives him this look and says like, we'll figure out another way.
Yeah.
You know, like
so
there's
good.
never any doubt
Never.
that they are on the same side. I love it.
Yeah, it's so good.
Okay, wait. And I also have to say that what I love about it is that there is never anything remotely romantic between them.
Not at all.
They're like siblings, and
It's
there's
perfect.
never any sense that there ever should have been anything more between them.
And I very much
and I
appreciate
absolutely
that.
love that because it's unusual to have
is.
like people who have charisma as good as theirs is, and you know, not trying to get them together.
Yeah, it's an easy choice to try to push them together, and they didn't, and it was great. And it also shows us a lot of who each of those characters are, that they need this friendship more than they need anything else.
And he's still in love with his dead wife.
And that too, but you know.
All right, I guess go
Anyway.
on and finish the point you were trying to make.
So now we're going to get to objects and how your characters interact with the world around them. So there's a small moment where Holga and Edgin are escaping and she sees an axe that she likes. I love this moment. She asks,
I love it too.
it's hilarious.
It is.
She asks questions about the axe, she compliments it, and when they eventually escape, she takes it because it's an awesome axe and she wants it.
That whole interaction where she's like asking this guy who's trying to kill her about his axe is hilarious.
It's so good. And at the end of it, they're escaping. She says something like, and before we leave the city, and Edgin immediately knows what she's going to say, that she wants to go and get the oil to take care of the blade.
Right.
Because she was criticizing the other guy for not oiling it enough. I think it was oil.
Yeah.
It's this small moment. It shows the depths of their relationship, first of all. It shows like how in tune they are with each other. It shows what she finds intriguing and axe. And it gives us a side to her character that like she loves this axe and weapons in general, but she's also kind of a nurturer. And it just really shows a lot with this very tiny moment that you would assume is just there for the joke,
Right.
but is actually there to really show us who these people are and how their relationship is.
Right.
So small interactions can really show us who your character is by what they focus on, why it would catch their interest, and how it makes them react or feel. Do they walk into a room and feel the need to touch all the plants, see how they're growing? Maybe they're a druid like Doric, or someone that is just more comfortable outside and in nature. These kind of small interactions really show our tendencies and give you another tool to make big declarations about your character with very simple sentences.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to talk more about backstory and GMC because we've kind of
Yes.
touched on that, but it's really important to characters and building up their characterization. So backstory is everything that's happened to a character before the story on the page begins. It's really important for named characters to have some backstory. That's typically how I distinguish between a character that we do and don't need a backstory for. Like if we
Yeah.
need their name, then they need to have a little bit of a backstory. Sometimes even unnamed characters can have backstories. Mm-hmm. It makes them feel like real people because real people have a past. And it also helps you to build up their character traits. So GMC stands for goal, motivation, and conflict. And that's related to backstory because Their backstory is partially what helps create their motivation, and also their goals. It's really the drive behind all of their actions and reactions. So what's tricky about GMC and backstory is that only a certain amount of it can be on the page. Like, you can't have the entire backstory shown on the page, or it gets really information heavy and slows the story down too much. So getting this balance right is something that I see a lot in my editing, as I'm sure you do, Carly. So how much backstory we get on that page will really depend on how much we need to know about a particular character to understand their place in the story. So it's not just like, how much do we like them, or, you know, because otherwise we would have gone way deeper into Zank's backstory too, because we like him a lot. Yeah, so, you know, it's really about how important is, like, how big is their part in the story? How much do we need to know about them to understand the overall plot? So, for example, we see the most of Elgin's backstory, like, on the page, so to speak, in this movie. We learn about his wife, when he like arrested the Red Wizard whose disciples killed his wife. About Holga helping to raise Kira, like all of these things. We know the most about his past. So I think that these are all really integral to the story that is currently being told. We need to know about what happened previously with Forge and Sophina to understand the context of the current story. The other characters' backstories are less important to the main story, but we still need some understanding of their pasts so that we can understand their actions and their reactions, so those really feel grounded. So, like, Simon gives us some information about Doric's past, that humans betrayed her and her people. And Holga talks about her past and her conversation with her ex-husband, and some with Elgin, so we see why Elgin and Kira are so important to her, like Carly mentioned a minute ago. So these backstories don't just tell us about the characters' pasts, they tell us why the characters are the way they are now. And that is part of what gives the characters agency to affect change in the story.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and so that's important even to secondary characters. You know, we don't want to have secondary characters that don't have agency, that we don't understand why they're getting involved with the story. And so that's why the idea of like an adventuring party, I think, is a really great analogy for any kind of cast in a book. Yeah. Because they all do need to be bringing their own, you know, backstory, their own background, and, you know, personality and flaws and traits, all of that stuff. Yeah. So similar with GMC, we only need to see their goal and motivation and the conflict as it applies to what's happening in the story. So we don't necessarily need to know every single goal they've ever had. We just need to know the things that are important to what we're seeing happen now in the story. So I do want to point out that we did a whole episode about GMC as well. That is episode 34, which was about the birdcage. So I recommend going back and listening to that for more in-depth information about GMC. We also did an episode about agency, which is our Princess Bride episode, and you should definitely listen to that one.
One of the best. Yeah, that's a great point and a great plug for previous episodes, so good job.
Thank you.
All right, so there's a few other elements that go into characterization, as well as a lot of other things that I'm not remembering to mention, because characterization is kind of everything. Basically, everything in your story can show who your character is and help to bring out their many facets. But that's really not helpful because that's too much. So I'm going to narrow it down to a few remaining elements and how you can use those to reinforce who your character is. Setting is another topic we've talked about before. I think that was our Train to Busan episode. Because we've been doing this podcast for years, and also everything intersects anyway.
It's true.
It's very true. But where you put your character and the types of settings can really reflect your character. Are they a fish out of water type? Then the setting would be very opposed to who they are. And in that way, it's going to really reinforce the reader's image of who the character is. So when Doric is in town, she looks really uncomfortable. Part of this is being surrounded by humans, but also she's more comfortable in nature. It kind of gives you that juxtaposition. Meanwhile, showing Edgin in a crowded tavern is going to show how easy it is for him to interact with others and manipulate those around him. So setting can really... Frickin' bards. Setting can really reflect and reinforce or like juxtapose your character. Mood can also reinforce this by reflecting usually your main character's internal state. A gothic horror is going to show the darkness within a character, whereas in this movie, the humor and levity really reflect Edgin's nature. And then finally, and most importantly, the voice or narrator very much reinforce who your characters are. So, if the character is your POV point of view character, their voice is going to show us who they are. We talk about this a lot in our episode on voice, but how a character talks is an exact reflection of their personality. In fact, I think in it we even say voice is basically a synonym for personality. It's about picking word choices and internal observations to show who your character is. And I'm not going to get into voice too much here because it's a whole other episode, but it is very important. It is a very important aspect of characterization.
Right.
Now it gets really interesting when it comes to characters that aren't your POV character. All the observation the POV character makes about the other characters is a reflection on both of them. Right. So how we view others shows who they are as well as who we are. Our observations are colored by our personality, and nothing is truer with the POV character. It's kind of, you see both of them when you give opinions.
Right.
So now, if you have a narrator that isn't one of your characters, you need to use their voice and their opinions to show what they think of the other characters. You show that through their narration and judgments and all that sorts of good stuff. So basically, you have a ton of tools at your disposal to show who your character is. Characterization is incredibly important to your story, so really try to make them real, three-dimensional, and compelling. And hopefully these are some good tools.
Yay.
Yay.
Good job, Carly.
Thank you. All right, so next month we're watching the animated movie Nimona, based on the graphic novel.
Yay. Woo. I'm very excited to watch it.
Too. It's going to be good.
Okay, you can find our podcast on our website, storychatradio.com, or you can follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or many other streaming services. While you're there, please leave us a rating. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at StoryChatRadio.
Thanks for joining in our nonsense.